On March 31, 1941, as the scorching Mediterranean sun begins its merciless ascent over the Libyan coastline, a solitary British scout vehicle races westward along the coastal highway toward Mersa El Brega. The driver's hands grip the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. Behind him, somewhere in the shimmering heat haze of the desert, something catastrophic is approaching. The young corporal doesn't know it yet, but he's about to witness the beginning of one of the most spectacular reversals of fortune in the entire North African campaign, a moment that will transform a seemingly minor skirmish into a strategic nightmare for the British Empire. The tiny settlement of Mersa El Brega, barely more than a cluster of sun-bleached buildings and a small port facility, sits at the geographical throat of Cyrenaica. To hold it is to control the gateway between Tripolitania and the vital prize of Tobruk beyond. To lose it means opening the floodgates to disaster. Lieutenant General Philip Neame, the newly appointed British commander in Cyrenaica, has placed his defensive hopes on this desolate outpost. But racing toward him from the west is a force he fundamentally underestimates. A German commander who rewrites the rules of desert warfare with every calculated risk he takes. His name is Erwin Rommel, and he's about to change everything. Can a scattered, under-equipped British garrison stop what's coming? Or will this forgotten stretch of coastal desert become the graveyard of Churchill's North African ambitions? To understand how Britain finds itself in this precarious position, we must rewind the clock 60 days. In early February 1941, the North African theater appears to be a British triumph. Operation Compass, launched the previous December, has shattered the Italian 10th Army. British and Commonwealth forces under General Richard O'Connor have swept across hundreds of miles of Libyan territory, capturing Bardia, Tobruk, and Benghazi in rapid succession. Over 130,000 Italian prisoners have been taken. Mussolini's dream of a new Roman Empire in Africa lies in smoking ruins. In London, Winston Churchill celebrates what appears to be Britain's first significant land victory of the war. The Western Desert Force has proven that Axis armies can be defeated, but triumph breeds dangerous complacency. Churchill, emboldened by success, makes a fateful decision. He orders the veteran divisions, the 6th Australian Infantry and the 7th Armoured Division, the famed Desert Rats, withdrawn from Libya. Their destination, Greece, where a new German threat looms. Little do they know that Adolf Hitler has already made his own countermove. On February 12, 1941, a Junkers Ju-52 transport aircraft touches down at Castel Benito airfield near Tripoli. Stepping onto the tarmac in his iconic peaked cap and leather coat is Generalleutnant Erwin Rommel, commander of the newly formed Deutsches Afrika Korps. His orders from Berlin are conservative: establish defensive positions, protect the Italian colony, avoid unnecessary risks. Rommel immediately ignores them. Meanwhile, back in Cairo, British intelligence catastrophically underestimates the German commitment to North Africa. They believe Rommel commands only a token force, perhaps a single reconnaissance battalion at most. The reality is starkly different. 2 full German divisions, the 5th Light Division and elements of the 15th Panzer Division, are arriving in Tripoli with modern equipment, aggressive leadership, and something the Italians conspicuously lacked: tactical excellence. By late March, as Rommel completes his reconnaissance of the front lines, he observes something the British don't want him to see: weakness. The defensive positions at Mersa El Brega and beyond are held by Green troops with inadequate armor support. The triumphant British war machine of February has become a hollow shell. Lieutenant General Neame, though decorated with a Victoria Cross from the previous war, commands forces spread impossibly thin across hundreds of miles of desert. Rommel senses opportunity. Against orders, against conventional military wisdom, against every logical calculation, he decides to attack. Not next month, not next week, now. The stage is set for a collision that will reverberate across the entire Mediterranean theater. Mersa El Brega exists at the mercy of geography. The settlement itself is nothing more than a wind-scoured collection of rectangular buildings clinging to the edge of the Gulf of Sidra, their walls bleached to the color of bone by relentless sun and salt spray. A small jetty extends into the turquoise waters, too shallow for anything larger than coastal vessels, useless for significant military supply. The real significance of this location lies not in what it contains, but in what it controls. To the north, the Mediterranean Sea stretches toward the horizon, its beauty masking the deadly reality that naval supremacy belongs entirely to the British. Any Axis advance must move by land. To the south, the terrain transforms dramatically into the Marmarica Plateau, a geological formation that creates a natural barrier of steep escarpments, loose sand, and treacherous wadis that swallow vehicles and break axles. The plateau rises like a wall, forcing military movement into a narrow coastal corridor, barely 15 miles wide at its tightest point. This geographical bottleneck makes Mersa El Brega the perfect defensive position, in theory. The coastal highway, really just a packed dirt track labeled optimistically as the Via Balbia by its Italian creators, squeezes between the sea and the escarpment. Ancient caravan routes and goat paths wind through the settlements of El Aghala and Mersa El Brega before continuing eastward toward Ajdabiya and the prize of Cyrenaica beyond. Whoever controls this bottleneck controls the entire region's fate. Lose Mersa El Brega, and the vast open terrain to the east becomes indefensible. The British understand this intellectually, but their preparations reveal a dangerous disconnect between theory and reality. The defensive positions consist of scattered strongpoints, company-sized positions dug into the rocky ground with minimal overhead protection. Barbed wire entanglements stretch between positions, already half buried by wind-blown sand. Several anti-tank guns, primarily the inadequate 2-pounder that will prove tragically insufficient against German armor, cover the approaches. Artillery support comes from a single battery of 25-pounder field guns positioned behind the ridgeline, their crews exhausted from weeks of continuous deployment. The weather in late March brings its own challenges. Daytime temperatures soar above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, turning metal equipment too hot to touch with bare hands. The Ghibli, the infamous desert sandstorm, can materialize without warning, reducing visibility to mere feet and infiltrating every mechanical component with abrasive grit. At night, temperatures plummet, leaving soldiers shivering in summer uniforms never designed for such extremes. Water dominates every tactical consideration. Each soldier receives a daily ration measured in pints, never sufficient to replace what the desert steals through sweat and breath. Mechanized vehicles consume water almost as rapidly as fuel, radiators boiling over, engines seizing from sand infiltration. The nearest reliable water source lies 30 miles to the rear. Into this unforgiving landscape, Britain has placed its hopes on undermanned, under-equipped units expected to hold against an enemy whose capabilities remain dangerously unknown. The defenders look westward across empty desert, wondering what approaches through the heat shimmer. They won't have to wait much longer. The responsibility for holding Mersa El Brega falls primarily upon the 2nd Armored Division, though calling it a division requires generous interpretation of military organization. After the withdrawal of veteran units to Greece, the formation represents a patchwork of depleted battalions, replacement troops, and hastily reorganized units that have never trained together. Major General Michael Gambit commands this cobbled-together force with growing unease. The armored component consists primarily of the 3rd Armored Brigade, but its condition tells a grim story of mechanical attrition. Of the brigade's original complement of cruiser tanks, fewer than 50 remain operational. Many are the outdated A9 and A10 cruiser tanks, mechanically unreliable vehicles with thin armor that can be penetrated by German anti-tank guns at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. The few newer A13 cruiser tanks offer speed but sacrifice armor protection. Their 2-pounder guns, while accurate, lacked the stopping power to reliably destroy German panzers. Supporting the armor is the Second Support Group, an ad hoc formation including elements of the King's Dragoon Guards conducting reconnaissance, several batteries of Royal Artillery, and infantry companies from regiments that have already suffered significant casualties. Among them are men from the Rifle Brigade and the Tower Hamlets Rifles, soldiers who weeks earlier celebrated victory at Bidafam, now exhausted, undersupplied, and wondering why they weren't rotated to the rear. Second Lieutenant Michael Carver, future Field Marshal, though he doesn't know it yet, commands a troop of cruiser tanks in this forward position. His diary entries from this period reveal the creeping anxiety. We are spread impossibly thin. Every position feels like an outpost with nothing behind it but more desert. In total, perhaps 3,000 British and Commonwealth troops hold the Mersa El Brega line, supported by fewer than 70 operational tanks and armored vehicles. Their supply situation borders on catastrophic. Ammunition stocks run low. Spare parts are non-existent. Food consists primarily of tinned rations consumed cold because fuel for cooking fires must be conserved. Approaching from the west comes a force of entirely different character. Rommel's Afrika Korps, spearheaded by the 5th Light Division under Generalmajor Johann Streich, represents the cutting edge of German mechanized warfare. The division fields approximately 8,000 combat troops, but more importantly, it brings over 150 panzers, primarily Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks mounting 50 and 75 guns respectively. These weapons outrange and outgun anything the British possess. Rommel's operations order from March 30, 1941 states, "Speed and determination will achieve what firepower alone cannot. We will not give the enemy time to react, time to reinforce, time to think. We attack at dawn." The German tactical doctrine emphasizes combined arms coordination that the British cannot match. Panzer formations advance with close infantry support from motorized rifle battalions. Self-propelled artillery moves with the tanks, providing immediate fire support. Luftwaffe Stuka dive bombers stand ready to strike any concentration of enemy armor. Perhaps most critically, German communications equipment allows real-time coordination between units, a capability the British sorely lack. Supporting the German spearhead are Italian formations of wildly varying quality. The Ariete Armored Division brings enthusiasm but outdated M1340 tanks that struggle mechanically in desert conditions. The Brescia Infantry Division follows on foot, tasked with occupying captured positions. These Italian units, demoralized by recent defeats, view the Germans with a mixture of relief and resentment. The numerical disparity creates inevitable mathematics. The defenders are outnumbered more than 2-to-1 in infantry, outgunned 3-to-1 in tanks, and face an opponent whose recent campaigns in Poland and France have perfected the art of blitzkrieg. The British defensive advantage of prepared positions provides some compensation, but geography works against them. The flat, open approaches to Mersa El Brega offer attacking armor-clear fields of fire and multiple approach routes. As the last hours of March tick away, the German columns complete their final approach march. Rommel himself moves forward in his command vehicle, personally reconnoitering the British positions through binoculars. He sees exactly what he expects, a thin defensive crust that will shatter under coordinated assault. At British headquarters, Lieutenant General Neame receives intelligence reports suggesting minor German probing attacks may occur within days. He does not believe the Afrika Korps capable of sustained offensive operations. His assessment catastrophically misreads both Rommel's intentions and capabilities. The defenders and attackers sleep their last peaceful night. Tomorrow, the desert will burn. The first indication of catastrophe comes not with thunder, but with dust. British forward observation posts detect movement on the western horizon just as the sun breaks above the Mediterranean. Through binoculars, they observe what appears to be the entire desert in motion, columns of vehicles raising dust plumes that merge into a brown curtain stretching from the coast to the southern escarpment. The watchers reach for radio handsets, but they're already too late. At roughly 6:30 a.m., the opening German artillery barrage crashes into British positions. The sound is distinctive, a freight train rumble followed by crashing detonations that throw up geysers of sand and rock. The 5th Light Division's artillery regiment delivers a systematic preparatory bombardment, targeting known British strongpoints with methodical precision. Unlike the scattershot Italian artillery the British have grown accustomed to, these German gunners employ observed fire, adjusting their aim based on spotter reports with devastating accuracy. Corporal James Henderson of the Tower Hamlets Rifles experiences the opening moments in his foxhole. The shells came in with a sound like ripping canvas, then the world exploded. Sand poured down on us. We couldn't see anything except brown fog and fire. When it lifted, the position to our left had simply disappeared, just a smoking crater where 12 men had been. Through the dissipating dust and smoke, the British defenders see them coming. German panzers advancing in echelon formation, turrets traversing slowly as they search for targets. The panzer commanders employ their superior optics to identify British positions from beyond effective return fire range. It's a calculated, professional approach to mechanized warfare that the defenders have never encountered. The 3rd Armored Brigade's cruiser tanks move forward to meet the threat, but the engagement begins disastrously. British tank commanders quickly discover their 2-pounder guns must close to within 600 yards for reliable penetration of German frontal armor. The panzers, meanwhile, begin destroying British tanks at ranges exceeding 1,200 yards. The mathematical outcome is inevitable and horrible. 2nd Lieutenant Carver's tank troop engages a platoon of Panzer IIIs near a small wadi north of the main highway. His after-action report captures the lopsided nature of the engagement. We hit their lead tank 3 times. The rounds sparked off the frontal armor and did no apparent damage. Their return fire was devastatingly accurate. My wingman's tank brewed up with the first hit, went up like a torch. We had no choice but to reverse into dead ground. By 8 a.m., the British armored response has already broken down. Individual tank troops fight isolated actions, unable to coordinate a coherent counterattack. German combined arms tactics prove overwhelming. When British tanks maneuver to engage panzers, German anti-tank guns concealed in the infantry formations pick them off. When British tanks attempt to suppress the anti-tank guns, the panzers re-engage. It's a deadly choreography the Germans have perfected, and the British have no answer. They might hear a faint humming sound just then, a sound that grows rapidly into a mechanical scream that drowns out even the artillery. The Luftwaffe arrives with theatrical precision. Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers plunge from the morning sky, their infamous sirens wailing like banshees. The psychological effect is as devastating as the ordnance itself. The Stukas target British artillery positions with practiced precision. Each aircraft dives nearly vertically, releasing its bomb at terrifyingly low altitude before pulling up in a climbing turn that seems to defy physics. The 25-pounder battery positioned behind the ridgeline receives concentrated attention. Within 15 minutes, 3 guns are destroyed outright, their crews scattered or dead. The surviving gun continues firing, a testament to British grit, but its impact on the battle's outcome is negligible. British air support, theoretically available, remains conspicuously absent. The few Hurricane fighters available to the Desert Air Force are committed elsewhere or grounded for maintenance. The sky belongs entirely to the Luftwaffe. As German armor bypasses or destroys British tank forces, the infantry strongpoints face their moment of truth. The 5th Light Division's motorcycle troops and motorized infantry advance rapidly, moving through gaps in the defensive line identified by reconnaissance. These German soldiers employ aggressive tactics refined during the French campaign. Suppressive machine gun fire pins defenders in place, while assault groups maneuver to flanking positions using wadis and terrain folds. The fighting devolves into savage close-quarters combat at several strongpoints. At position Baker, held by men from the Rifle Brigade, German infantry supported by flamethrower teams assault the perimeter. Private Thomas Wilkins mans a Bren gun in a forward pit. They came in fast, firing from the hip. We cut down the first wave, but they kept coming. When the flamethrower hit our position, the heat was so intense you couldn't breathe. The lads started pulling back, and there was nothing officers could do to stop them. By mid-morning, the British defensive line has not so much broken as dissolved. Individual units continue fighting, but coherent defensive coordination has collapsed. Radio communications, never reliable, break down completely as command vehicles are destroyed or forced to displace constantly. Lieutenant General Neame, attempting to control the battle from his headquarters 40 miles to the rear, receives fragmentary and contradictory reports. He doesn't yet grasp that he's not facing a probing attack, but a full-scale offensive. Rommel, never content with frontal assault alone, has dispatched a substantial force southward to exploit the supposedly impassable terrain of the Marmarica Plateau. This column, including elements of the Ariete Division and German reconnaissance units, discovers what British planners assumed impossible: goat tracks and wadi beds that allow vehicle movement through the escarpment. By late morning, this flanking force threatens to cut the coastal highway east of Mersa El Brega, completing an encirclement. British reconnaissance patrols detect this movement and report it frantically, but the information arrives too late for effective response. The few reserve units available are already committed to stopping the coastal assault. Major General Gambit, recognizing the developing disaster, orders a fighting withdrawal. But withdrawals under pressure require precisely the kind of coordinated communication and unit cohesion that no longer exists. What begins as an organized disengagement rapidly degenerates into a desperate escape. By 2 p.m., the Battle of Mersa El Brega has effectively ended, but the disaster is just beginning. German forces, rather than consolidating their captured positions as conventional military doctrine suggests, immediately continue eastward. Rommel, personally leading from his command vehicle, drives his units forward with manic intensity. "Don't give them time to recover," he radios to his commanders. "Keep moving. Speed is our armor now." The British retreat becomes a nightmare of mechanical breakdowns, fuel shortages, and constant air attacks. Tank crews, discovering their vehicles lack the fuel to reach safety, destroy their tanks with thermite grenades and attempt to escape on foot. Artillery batteries, unable to displace quickly enough, are overrun and captured intact. Supply columns, caught on the exposed coastal highway, are strafed by Messerschmitt fighters and picked off by pursuing German armored cars. Second Lieutenant Carver, his tank destroyed, retreats eastward with his surviving crew in a commandeered truck. The road was chaos: burning vehicles, abandoned equipment, men walking in small groups without weapons or unit identification. We had stopped being an army and become a mob. The only question was whether we could stay ahead of the Germans long enough to reach Tobruk. As the sun sets on March 31st, the situation has transcended mere tactical defeat and approached strategic catastrophe. Mersa El Brega has fallen. The gateway to Cyrenaica stands open, and Rommel, reading British weaknesses with predatory precision, has no intention of stopping. The moment when retreat becomes rout cannot be pinpointed to a single decision or incident. It emerges from cascading failures of communication, coordination, and command clarity. By April 1st, as German forces continue their relentless advance, British commanders face a ghastly realization. They have lost control not just of a battle, but of the entire campaign. Lieutenant General Neame attempts to organize a defensive line at Ajdabiya, 40 miles east of Mersa El Brega, but the units needed to hold it are scattered across hundreds of square miles of desert. Some formations receive orders to stand and fight. Others receive orders to fall back to Benghazi. Many receive no orders at all, their commanders making independent decisions based on fragmentary information. The counterattack that might have stopped Rommel's advance never materializes. The remaining British armor, reduced to fewer than 30 operational tanks, lacks the fuel, ammunition, and coordination to mount effective resistance. A planned concentration of forces near Msus dissolves when conflicting orders send units in different directions. Perhaps most critically, British intelligence continues catastrophically underestimating German strength and intentions. Even as Rommel's columns race eastward, headquarters assessments suggest the Afrika Korps will pause to consolidate, allowing time for British reinforcements to arrive. This fundamental misreading of Rommel's character, his absolute commitment to maintaining momentum regardless of conventional military caution, costs Britain precious hours that might have been used to establish effective defensive positions. Individual acts of courage punctuate the retreat but cannot reverse the strategic tide. At Antalat, a troop of British tanks makes a desperate stand, destroying several German vehicles before being overwhelmed. At Msus airfield, ground crews burn aircraft that cannot be evacuated, thick black smoke marking another position abandoned. These are rearguard actions, not turning points, buying minutes and hours rather than revering fate. The human cost mounts with each passing mile. British casualties from the battle and subsequent retreat eventually exceed 2,000 killed, wounded, or captured. Hundreds of vehicles, tanks, trucks, carriers, are destroyed or abandoned. Artillery pieces desperately needed for future defense are spiked and left behind. Entire supply dumps fall intact into German hands, providing Rommel with captured British fuel, ammunition, and rations that will sustain his advance. By April 3rd, just 3 days after the initial attack at Mersa El Brega, German forces recapture Benghazi, the same city that British Commonwealth forces triumphantly entered just 2 months earlier. The wheel of fortune has completed a dizzying revolution, and the momentum remains entirely with the Afrika Korps. The British withdrawal transforms into a desperate race for Tobruk, the one fortress port that might anchor a defensive line and prevent complete expulsion from Libya. For 9 days, German forces pursue the retreating British columns across the Cyrenaican Bulge, capturing vast quantities of equipment and hundreds of prisoners. The pursuit resembles a hunt more than conventional military operations. German motorcycle troops and armored cars ranging ahead to cut roads, Luftwaffe aircraft strafing any concentration of vehicles, panzer units appearing unexpectedly from directions British commanders thought impassable. The human drama of this retreat leaves scars on survivors' memories for decades. Men march through waterless desert, discarding equipment to maintain pace. Wounded are transported in vehicles barely functional, bouncing over rough terrain without morphine or proper medical attention. Units lose contact with higher headquarters and navigate by following the sun eastward, hopping to find friendly positions rather than German spearheads. Lieutenant General Neame and Major General Gambit, attempting to relocate their command post in the chaos, drive directly into a German patrol on April 6. Both generals are captured, a humiliation that leaves British forces in North Africa effectively leaderless at the crisis moment. Command devolves to Major General Leslie Morshead of the 9th Australian Division, who receives the unenviable task of defending Tobruk with whatever forces can reach its perimeter. The strategic consequences extend far beyond Libya. In London, Winston Churchill receives reports of the disaster with barely concealed fury. The triumphant victory of February has evaporated, replaced by desperate questions about how a supposedly defeated enemy has driven Britain back to where it started and threatens to go further. The commitment to Greece, which stripped North Africa of veteran divisions, now appears catastrophically premature. For Rommel, Mersa El Brega and the subsequent advance represent vindication of his aggressive tactical philosophy. Against orders, against logistics limitations, against conventional military wisdom, he has achieved a stunning reversal that will earn him promotion to General der Panzertruppe and mythic status as the Desert Fox. His personal bravery, repeatedly positioning himself at the front of advancing columns, inspires his troops even as it alarms his staff officers. The final tally speaks volumes. In approximately 10 days of operations, German forces advance over 600 miles, recapture all of Cyrenaica except Tobruk, inflict over 2,000 casualties, and capture or destroy hundreds of British vehicles. British prestige suffers a devastating blow. The myth of invincibility created by Operation Compass shatters completely. Yet the Germans' spectacular advance contains seeds of future problems. Supply lines stretch impossibly thin. The Afrika Korps outruns its logistics, creating shortages that will worsen. Tobruk remains in British hands, a fortress port that denies Rommel a forward supply base and bleeds German resources during months of siege. The rapid advance, for all its tactical brilliance, creates strategic vulnerabilities that will eventually prove fatal. The disaster at Mersa El Brega and the subsequent collapse of the British position in Cyrenaica demands accountability. Multiple levels of failure, strategic, operational, and tactical, combine to create catastrophe. At the strategic level, Winston Churchill's decision to withdraw veteran divisions for the Greek campaign proves premature and ultimately unsuccessful. The forces sent to Greece fail to stop the German invasion there, while leaving North Africa critically weakened. Churchill, driven by political considerations and a romantic attachment to supporting Greece, overrules military advisors who warn of the North African risk. The decision reflects a fundamental tension in British strategy, attempting to fight on too many fronts with insufficient resources. Intelligence failures compound strategic mistakes. British Middle East Command catastrophically underestimates German capabilities, intentions, and leadership quality. The assessment that Rommel commands only a token force demonstrates either spectacular incompetence or dangerous wishful thinking. The British intelligence apparatus, successful in other theaters, fails utterly to grasp the threat developing in Libya. No effective reconnaissance, aerial or ground, provides accurate information about Afrika Korps' strength. Operationally, Lieutenant General Neame shoulders significant blame despite his limited resources. His defensive deployment spread forces too thinly, creating a brittle defensive crust rather than defense in depth. He fails to maintain adequate reserves for counterattack or to plug breakthrough. Communication and coordination between scattered units break down completely during the battle, a failure of command structure and training. Neame's capture during the retreat, while personally unfortunate, symbolizes the broader collapse of command effectiveness. The decision-making around withdrawal proves particularly problematic. Conflicting orders, delayed responses to German maneuvers, and failure to establish successive defensive lines transform tactical defeat into strategic rout. A fighting withdrawal, though difficult, remained possible, but required precisely the kind of coordinated command and control that had already broken down. At the tactical level, British armor doctrine proves inadequate against German combined arms tactics. The tendency to employ tanks in isolated charges without infantry or artillery support plays directly into German strengths. Tank-on-tank duels favor the Germans' superior guns, optics, and coordination. The inadequacy of British tank design, thin armor, weak guns, mechanical unreliability, reflects years of peacetime budget constraints and doctrinal confusion. Yet British soldiers and junior officers fight courageously against overwhelming odds. The failure lies not in individual bravery, but in systemic preparation, training, and doctrine. The desert rats of December 1940 would have fought very differently than the depleted, under-equipped units facing Rommel in March 1941. For Germany, Rommel's victory validates aggressive leadership, but also reveals dangerous tendencies. His decision to attack against orders and beyond his logistics support demonstrates brilliant tactical instinct but terrible strategic planning. The advance creates supply problems that will haunt the Afrika Korps for months. Rommel's tendency toward personal heroics, leading from the front, often out of communication with his headquarters, works during rapid advance but creates command chaos during defensive operations. The Italian contribution receives mixed assessment. Italian formations generally fight more effectively under German leadership and coordination, but fundamental equipment and training deficiencies limit their effectiveness. The Ariete Division's participation in the southern flanking movement shows competence, but other Italian units struggle to maintain pace with German mechanized forces. Ultimately, Mersa El Brega demonstrates the hazards of strategic overreach combined with intelligence failure. Britain attempts to hold an exposed position with inadequate forces while underestimating the opponent, a recipe for disaster. Germany exploits this weakness with tactical excellence but creates future vulnerabilities through overextension. The battle becomes a case study in how rapid victory can disguise strategic problems, and how spectacular defeat often results from accumulated errors rather than single catastrophic decisions. The forgotten Battle of Mersa El Brega, overshadowed by later, larger engagements at Tobruk, Gazala, and El Alamein, deserves recognition as the pivot point of the North African campaign's middle phase. In the span of a single day, the strategic balance shifts from British confidence to desperate defense. The engagement proves that momentum in desert warfare matters as much as numerical strength, that leadership quality can compensate for material disadvantage, and that intelligence failures carry catastrophic consequences. The human cost, while modest compared to later battles, nonetheless represents tragedy for families in Britain and across the Commonwealth. Approximately 400 British soldiers die in the battle and immediate retreat. Over 1,600 are captured, facing years in prisoner-of-war camps. Hundreds more suffer wounds that will affect them for life. Each statistic represents an individual human story, a letter home that will never be written, a family that will receive a War Office telegram, a young man who will never realize his peacetime dreams. For the soldiers who escaped to Tobruk, Mersa El Brega marks the beginning of months of siege warfare, a different kind of hell characterized by constant air raids, supply shortages, and the claustrophobic reality of defending a fortress surrounded by enemies. The Rats of Tobruk will earn immortal fame, but that fame is purchased with blood and endurance born from the disaster at Mersa El Brega. The battle's strategic significance extends beyond Libya. The sudden German success forces Britain to commit additional resources to North Africa that might have been used elsewhere. It emboldens Axis strategy in the Mediterranean, leading to increased Italian naval operations and Luftwaffe deployments. It demonstrates to neutral nations, particularly the United States, not yet in the war, that Britain's military position remains precarious despite earlier successes. For Rommel, Mersa El Brega launches a legend. The Desert Fox, sobriquet, the reputation for tactical brilliance, the mythology that will endure long after the war, all trace their origins to this moment when a German general defied orders and conventional wisdom to achieve spectacular victory. That mythology, however, obscures the operational and strategic mistakes that accompany the tactical triumph. Perhaps most significantly, Mersa El Brega establishes the pattern of the North African campaign's next 18 months, dramatic advances and retreats across the same desert landscape, each side achieving temporary victory only to confront logistics limitations that prevent decisive strategic success. The campaign becomes a pendulum swinging back and forth across Cyrenaica, consuming resources both sides can ill afford, until finally ending at El Alamein and the subsequent Allied invasion of Northwest Africa. As the sun sets on April 1941, with German forces consolidating their positions and British forces preparing Tobruk's defenses, both sides know this story is far from finished. The road east lies open before Rommel, but that road leads to Tobruk, a fortress that will prove far harder to crack than the scattered defenses of Mersa El Brega. But that road also leads to El Alamein, and beyond El Alamein lies a reckoning that Rommel, in his moment of triumph, cannot yet imagine. The Desert Fox has won his first great victory in Africa. He doesn't know it yet, but he has also set in motion the events that will eventually lead to his defeat. The desert, as soldiers on both sides learn, gives nothing freely. Not victory, not survival, not truth. It simply waits, patient and merciless, for the next army to test itself against its infinite, empty horizons.